My roommate left her feces smeared all over the bathroom walls and poisoned me. I lived with an awful, now ex-roommate. This happened back in 2020. I moved out of a living situation where a caregiver was allowing a small dog to attack my cat. I moved out fast for her safety, unknowingly into an even worse situation. In my state, the government helps homeless people through a program, and in comes Sherry, fake name for privacy's sake. Sherry is an alcoholic with extreme IBS and, as you probably guessed, came off the streets. It was my first time moving out on my own. I noticed pretty early on that Sherry was a slob, but this was to be expected as she didn't really have experience cleaning a home. The issues started when I woke up late at night and used the bathroom. When I sat down and felt the floor and seat was wet. I turned the lights on and, to my horror, it was like a brown slaughter scene. Human feces spread on the toilet seat, the floor, the walls next to the toilet. It was like a diarrhea bomb went off. I didn't even know that was possible. I informed my landlord, who only believed me with picture evidence, which should have been a huge red flag at the time, but I was still a teenager. I confronted her the next day and she explained that she has IBS, that she can't help it. I said, I understand you have a condition, but if you make a mess it has to be cleaned. She mopped the floor, and I had to take her back into the bathroom and instruct her to clean the walls and the toilet seat where the stains remained. I thought all was well. Fast forward 2 weeks. Both of us and my cat are experiencing dry throat, intense stomach aches, migraines, and dizziness. I noticed that when I walked on the bathroom floor my feet were burning. I asked Sherry if she also felt sick. She said yes and didn't know why. It clicked a day later. I asked what she cleaned the bathroom floor with. She says, bleach. I said, how much water did you dilute it with? Silence. I asked again and she said, I just used bleach. I said, straight bleach? She started yelling and I shut myself in my room, furious. I remopped the floor twice before the symptoms disappeared. My cat was living in my one bedroom at the time and so she had the most exposure, unable to go anywhere that could get away from the scent of bleach fuming into my room from under the door. This incident made me incredibly angry with Sherry, but I let it go. Since she was brought into the house using a government program, it was hard to kick her out for the landlord. It sucked because she'd spend all her money drinking herself stupid, which made her IBS that much worse. Every incident was documented and shared with him. It is important to know he gave us access to the upstairs bathroom if we needed it. Cut to a few months later, I'm cleaning the kitchen and mopping. I wear headphones while I clean to make it easier to focus, and I at this point have kept my room locked since I found Sherry opening my door without knocking and suspected she was snooping through my stuff. The apartment has a kitchen door identical to and right next to my bedroom door. I lock my door and get to mopping. Suddenly the kitchen door is being banged on and Sherry is screaming. Well, I had unknowingly locked the kitchen door instead of my own. She was howling, banging, and threatening to end me, along with calling me slurs I won't repeat. I apologized through the door but was honestly scared she'd attack me outright. I waited for her to walk away, unlocked the door, and locked myself in my room. I call the landlord, tell him what's happening and he says that she's just kidding. She won't do anything, she's just an old woman. I tell him she's threatening to end me and he brushes me off. It isn't until she calls him and threatens to end me to him that he even comes over to see what's going on. Suddenly the banging continues, and I mean walls are shaking, she's hitting the door so hard. I recorded this and said I just unlocked the door. She screams yay and I locked it back so landlord could see what you did, stupid B. You made me crap myself. Landlord gets there and doesn't believe me until I make him watch the video. He tells her she just could have gone upstairs. I tell him he needs to believe me when I say something is going on that serious. I mean it. She ends up finally getting kicked out, and someone even worse moved in before I get the hell out of there. What's the dumbest thing you've done out of pure horniness? Spoke to a guy online. He was older and kept mentioning fur. I thought that meant that he was identified as a bear. He kept saying he loved fur, and all things fur. I was like, okay, he must be into hairy guys and bears and crap like that. Being moderately hairy myself, I thought I could satisfy his need for fur. Well, upon arrival at his house, he greeted me in an ankle-length fur coat, chinchilla. At this point I realized he meant actual fur, and fur items. I went in and he had like, an entire room full of fur coats, most of them on the floor all spread out for us to lie on. I hooked up with him for a bit, he loved to rub the fur coat on his willy and crap. Whatever, it was very humdrum. Those boomers are so easy to get off since they went through puberty without internet adult flimps and the slightest breeze across their willies gets them hard. Anyway, on my way out the door he asked if I liked fur. I said I loved fur coats. Then he offered me one, a floor-length Arctic fox. I of course declined. I did not have a spare $5K to give him, nor did I want to owe him for anything. I told him flat out that I did not plan on continuing this, that this was just a hookup, and that I would essentially never see him again, let alone arrange for some form of payment. I wasn't about to whore myself out, especially for a, ladies, fur coat from the 80s. Shoulders looking like a mixture of a quarterback and Alexis Morel Carrington Colby Dexter Rowan. He insisted that he really wanted me to have it and that I would never have to owe him for this and that we would never even have to meet again. I took the coat, and this is where I effed up. Days later he texts me, when will we meet again? I ignored him for a while. Days go by, I get another, more insistent, text. When are we meeting up again? I gave you that fur coat, you need to see me now. I went through the whole I told you I had no intentions of seeing you again and you insisted I take this coat after I rejected it like 3 times and also you insisted I would owe you nothing and that I take the coat. He said that I needed to see him again to return the coat or that he wanted me to give him a pair of my dirty underwear. I was floored. He knew I had no intention of ever seeing him again, no means of paying for a coat like this, and that I was above whoring myself out, let alone for a measly fur coat. I reminded him of this. I said that I did not feel safe meeting him in person to give him this coat any longer since he was now attempting to manipulate me and coerce me back into an intimate circumstance with him. He then said that he would call the police on me. I reminded him that he gave me the coat, insisted that I take it, and insisted that I would owe him nothing for it. He then said that if I did not return the coat or give him my dirty underwear, he would tell everyone I was gay. I laughed and informed him that he was free to do that because A, everyone knows I'm gay as hell, and B, I don't live a cowardly life in the closet, and therefore don't care. I told him I did not appreciate him lying to me, and then trying to blackmail me into having intercourse with him, giving the coat back, or giving him a pair of my dirty underwear like some backpage slag. He got frustrated, thinking that these scare tactics and blackmailing would induce me into taking him seriously and suddenly believing him to be honest and true to his already broken words. Then he brought out the big guns. He said that if I did not meet him to hook up, give him a pair of my dirty underwear, and give him back the coat, he would tell his wife all about it. I did not know he was married, or masquerading as a straight man. He was one of those guys, the straight closet guy who wants all the benefits of sleeping with men, but none of the responsibility or social stigma. A effing scared coward. I said to him, so let me get this straight, you want me to hook up with you again, after you said I wouldn't have to, you want me to give you back the coat you insisted I take against my wishes, and you want me to give you my dirty underwear, and if I don't comply, you're going to tell your wife on me? A wife that you conveniently failed to even mention before? I laughed, and he got really angry. It was then I realized he gave me the coat thinking that he could use this, and his threats, against me to coerce me into having intercourse with him and all his fur coats again. I informed him that I was aware of this. He hung up on me. What story do you have that disproves the worst she can say is no? In high school, I once asked a girl out that I didn't think I had any chance with. I figured hey, the worst she could say is no, assumed she would probably say no, and planned on using the experience as a comfort when trying to ask someone out that I thought I had a chance with. In other words, when trying to work up the courage to ask someone out in the future, I could think back to this moment, realize from this experience that being told no wasn't so bad, and go for it. I asked her out, she said she was going out with someone else, and that was that. Easy and painless. And then she started telling people that I demanded that she switch from her current partner to me, and that she had to shout at me to get me to leave her alone. Someone else started a rumor that, after I got rejected, I ran into the bathroom and cried. Someone else came up with a short little theme song about how I got rejected. Everyone found it catchy, including people I thought were my friends, so people would sing it at me everywhere. Random people in the hallways would see me and start singing it at me. I couldn't escape it until people finally lost interest several months, maybe even a year? I don't remember exactly, later. I was horribly humiliated and depressed and sad and so on for all that time, but I figured it was just a fluke. Then, in the fall semester in college, a female friend promised to me that she would get me laid by the end of the spring semester. I'd overheard her talking to people about it, wondering whether it would be better to pair me with another virgin or with someone experienced, for example, so even though months passed with no actual progress, I assumed things were happening behind the scenes. On the last day of the spring semester, there was a big party at her place, so I texted her earlier in the day so if today's the last day of the semester, does that mean I'm getting laid? I was thinking the worst she could say was no, as in haha, no, that was all a joke or something to that effect. No harm in bringing it up, right? I wouldn't have been upset if that was what happened. I don't remember her response exactly, but I think she took it as a joke and replied non-seriously with a hell yeah. Or something along those lines. Halfway through the party that night, she gets everyone's attention and announces that she got the best text ever today. I assumed it wasn't my text, because that wouldn't make sense, so I was looking forward to hearing what she had to say. She then proceeded to, in a mockingly stupid voice, read my text to everyone with absolutely no context, and then point to me. Everyone effing lost it with laughter. I heard one guy later say to a girl next to him, "Don't get too intoxicated, or you might end up sleeping with him," while motioning to me. They both laughed pretty hard about that one. I was already intoxicated at that point, so I couldn't drive home, so I was trapped. I spent a lot of time silently crying to myself in the bathroom. I was tempted to try to drive home anyway, because I really didn't care what happened to me at that point, but the thought that I might end up hurting someone else stopped me. The events of that night replayed in my head almost every day for the entire summer. I felt like I was worthless as a person, completely undesirable romantically and intimately. I felt like I was just, uselessly broken, unrepairable, that I was a misfit that didn't belong in this world. What's your worst rejection story? Senior year of high school, this girl I had met through a mutual friend and I suddenly had multiple random encounters. A few weeks go by, and we really start to hit it off. We spend every day together, I call and talk to her on the phone, we even end up going out to dinner, not an official date. I'm totally smitten by this girl and things are moving along perfectly. Our prom was coming up and I decided to ask her. Now, the place I lived in had rather elaborate methods of asking people to prom/homecoming type dances, so my buddy and I hatched a plan to ask this girl out by messing with her room and putting some clever personalized stuff around. Seriously, this is normal. I call her mom to get permission to do all this, and I start to get really excited when she agrees. That night I got a phone call from the girl that basically went like this: "Hey, so I know I'm not supposed to know this, but I heard you were planning on asking me to prom, and I think that would be a bad idea, so, normally this is where the story would end. This one doesn't do that." After putting my shattered pride back together, I move on with my life. I graduate, leave town and generally proceed to think about the crappy events as little as possible, but it always stings a little when I think about her. About a year after this whole incident, I got a random phone call from this girl. We strike back up our old friendship, and things move along quite nicely. In the course of getting to know one another again, she tells me that the prom thing wasn't my fault. Turns out she'd just gotten out of a pretty rough relationship and wasn't ready to start something new and didn't want to hurt me. I get really excited about this. As we continue to talk every day again, I realize that I'm totally into this girl for the second time. As luck would have it, I also made some plans that meant moving back to town a few months down the road. Well, Christmas rolls around and I make a trip back to visit family and friends. When I get into town, I call her and make plans to take her out on a real first date. We end up spending the majority of the day together, something like 12 hours, and everything goes perfectly. The night ends and I couldn't be happier. We made plans to get together later that week at a friend's house. When she shows up to our friend's house, she almost immediately hides out in her car to take a phone call, for about 3 hours. In my heart, I know this is bad news for me. When she finally comes in, she purposefully sits across the room from me even though I try to get her to be near me. From that point on we stopped talking to one another every day and moved down to about once every few weeks. I find out months later, through Facebook, that she's dating someone else. Her ex-boyfriend. The one who called her while she was at our friend's house to profess his love and apologize for whatever wrong things he did. 2 days after what up to that point had been the most perfect date of my life. We eventually became friends again, and we both got married. Who is the worst kid, under 15, you ever met? Used to work at a summer camp where we would have kids from every demographic and socio-economic group, kids on scholarship who barely made it all the way to the super rich. All in all the kids were good with a few exceptions, one of which I will call John. Now John was about 13 when I worked with him and clearly had some emotional issues that were not being addressed by his super wealthy parents who instead would ship him off to summer camps all over the country. Being that he was a teen, he went into our teen camp, which was more autonomous but still relatively structured. To get to the campsite you had to cross a bridge that was over a narrow but very deep creek. Relevance will come up. One day as I am sitting in my office I get a text from a counselor at the teen camp who told me to get over there as soon as possible, so naturally I get up and sprint there. I show up and John is sitting at a picnic table with 3 other kids and 2 very upset looking counselors. As I approach, John starts yelling that whatever they say is a lie and they hate him. I pull the lead counselor aside and he tells me that they caught John throwing a brick from the campsite on Duck and her chicks as they were peacefully swimming down the creek. Unfortunately John hit the mother but didn't end her, so now there was this poor duck thrashing around in front of her chicks on the shore of the creek. All of this was about 40 feet from another cabin group of young girls. We called an animal rehab specialist who came out and safely got all the chicks, but the mother died shortly afterwards. He also punished a poor little girl and broke her glasses. Needless to say, the head camp director is pissed and wants him to leave immediately. We had a behavioral provision in the camp rules that said if children became too hard to work with they would be sent home. Called his parents, who did not seem alarmed with the behavior and said they were leaving for a cruise the next day. Camp director reminds them of the provision and how their son was no longer welcome in camp. Again, parents don't seem alarmed and finally send a friend to get the kid. I saw on Facebook that John is currently studying medicine, which scares the absolute life out of me. When was someone's assumption about you terribly wrong? I was once assumed as a peardo. Hear me out. I had taken my nephew to the park. My sister and Bill were in town for a few days and they were going out for dinner, just the 2 of them. I took my little 3-year-old nephew to the park. It was just us. We were running around having a good time, pushing him on the swings, finding cool rocks, etc. A lady and her big dog had walked over to me at one point and asked, "Oh, your son is so cute." I responded with, "Thanks, but it's not my son." She then, without time to explain, flipped a switch, tried to get between me and my nephew while taking pictures of me on her phone. I was telling her to get the hell away from us, making my nephew cry because he didn't know what was going on. She called the police and she's screaming at the top of her lungs for me to stay back or she'll defend herself while trying to pick up my nephew. I suddenly stopped caring if she thought I was a peardo or not. She had her hands on my nephew and that wasn't going to fly with me. I picked him up and we started speed walking back to my car. Big mistake. She started telling the cops my license plate number, make/model of my car, saying I was kidnapping him. I was so mad I was seeing red. I sat in the car because I thought it would be best if at that point I waited for the police. I had him buckled into his car seat with the engine running just in park, idling. She's slamming her hands on my windshield trying to get other people to come help her, but a few people just come and stand behind my car so I can't leave. Police show up. Guns drawn, telling me to exit the vehicle. I get out. I have tears in my eyes at this point because I'm so mad/confused. I got handcuffed. I was asked a million questions until they finally understood that this woman didn't know either of us. I finally got to tell my side of the story, which consisted of, I took my nephew to the park. This lady asked if I was the father. I said no. She didn't listen to a word I said after that and tried to take her from me. The lady is looking super embarrassed once I'm done telling the story. My nephew is asked to come up in my arms because he's scared. I picked him up and he cuddled right in. The cops asked the kid if I was his uncle and he just nodded yes silently. The woman starts this sob story about how she was abducted as a child and thought she was doing the right thing. I didn't care at that point. I was so mad at her. We leave, all laugh about it at dinner. Life went on, but it had got to be the worst time of my life. What reason did you break up with your BF/GF for that they will never know about? I watched him cheat on me and he will never know. We lived in the same city and had been dating for about 10 months. The last couple of months his passive-aggressive manipulations had begun to come a bit more transparent, but I was young, and convinced I could fix everything. On a Friday when we had plans, he called to say a friend at work had been fired, and he was going to go out with him to help cheer him up. It was fine, I said, and he hung up before I could finish my sentence that I had left some work papers at his place the night before and needed to grab them. I had keys, so I didn't think anything of swinging by after dinner and drinks with my brother to let myself in to grab them. As expected, he and his two best friends/roommates were out. What was not expected was when I was in a little office adjoining his bedroom gathering my papers, the apartment door opened and a lot of giggling ensued. I kept quiet as I assumed one of his friends was getting lucky and I didn't want to interrupt. Imagine my surprise when the giggling and intoxicated slurring approached the bedroom I usually occupied, followed by the squeaking bed springs and a symphony of noises usually associated with mating pigs. Any hope I might have had that it was one of his roommates too intoxicated to find his own room was dashed when she started yelling his name. As they were both clearly schnoozled, it didn't take long for them to pass out mid-thrust. I managed to unfreeze myself, and after spending several very sad moments looking at the irrefutable proof that this relationship was not worth saving, I slipped out the front door. I spent all night walking the city, at first feeling ashamed that he had cheated on me, then increasingly more angry that I felt ashamed, then finally angry at him. By the time morning arrived, I had decided how best to deal with the situation. I walked back to his building and called him when he picked up, clearly mostly asleep.